good afternoon. It's 6 a.m. in the morning here where I am in California right now. But I knew that when I accepted this invitation that I might be here. But I still am happy to be up early and to be with you. And I hope this can be an interesting reflection we can have together on this topic. Like if you're willing to have your cameras on, that's a bit more sort of easier for me to communicate and know that actually are people out there. You're free to do whatever you want, of course, that's you're welcome to have your camera on if you want that. This topic about fanaticism and conspiracy theories, that's something I've been talking about for some years now. I am a psychiatrist. That's my background. I'm Norwegian. That's my accent. I'm currently working for the General Conference in the Health Ministries Department. Within health, I was originally asked to talk about this issue for a group we had of nutritionists. We have a nutrition council and they wanted me to have a presentation for them, and I thought, well, what can I talk about for a group of nutritionists? And that's when I thought, well, we actually have had quite a few issues within the church and within the health aspect of things when it comes to fanaticism, people going to extremes. So that's how, in a way, I got into this topic. Then from there, it sort of continued to work on this and develop. And now with the pandemic that we've had, I've also added in conspiracy theories in this. I think fanaticism and conspiracy theories are closely related issues, and the characteristics, the dynamics, the psychology of these, I think, are very much linked, and that's what I want to share some reflections also. And like, this is just not going to be like a scientific analysis of these problems, also including some spiritual perspectives, and especially I was amazed actually when I started searching what does Ellen White have to say about fanaticism and extremism, as she spoke extensively on these issues because they were relevant back then, and unfortunately they are relevant still today. So I hope this can be of interest. And if you have, I suggest that if you have any thoughts, any reflections along the way, maybe just put them in the chat or take notes of them. I've found before that, like, if we open up for discussion along the way in the presentation, we'll probably never finish. So you're free to do that, put them in there or take note of them, and then we'll have some time at the end to discuss and talk about these issues. And I don't have all the answers on this. So feel free to ask questions, to critique it, to add perspectives and thoughts that you may have. So I will share my screen on this. So just starting with a couple of conspiracy theories or conspiracy theory issues that come to surface. I don't know if you have heard about the chemtrail, which we call conspiracy theory. We all probably most of us, we have been flying, not so much the last months or year maybe, but we've seen these planes flying over and leaving these trails after them. There is a conspiracy theory that's actually believed by quite a few people, that these are not just condensation, like water condensation from the airplane engines, but people are speculating that this has to do with solar radiation management, weather modification, psychological manipulation, human population control, biological chemical warfare, or testing of biological and chemical agents on the population. I don't know if you've ever thought that what you see in the sky has anything to do with those things, but actually quite a lot of people believe that a study done in 2012 or 11 said that in the US, Canada, and the UK, just to pick those countries, 2.6% of the population thought that, or they completely believed that there's some kind of conspiracy behind these trails that the planes leave, and 14% were like open to the possibility that there might be something. This may not be sort of the most dangerous conspiracy theory out there. If you, whatever you believe about what's going on when the plane's up there, as long as you don't try to hijack a plane or crash a plane to prevent these things from happening, probably not much harm is done. But there are other conspiracy theories that definitely cause harm. Some of you may have picked up this story from August last year, where a father killed his two children. He had been like probably gone into the or he had gone into the QAnon conspiracy theories, the Illuminati conspiracy theories, and he had this idea that his wife had what he called like this serpent DNA. It's a conspiracy theory saying that many people in leading positions are not actually real people. They are what they are lizard people, so that they have morphed into human beings. But this is a conspiracy theory that actually people believe in. Here, this man, he had like somehow gotten this idea that his wife had this serpent or lizard DNA, and he's passed it on to his children, and that by killing his children, he would saving the world from becoming monsters. A real story. Someone who has been like on the internet, reading, feeding his mind. I don't know, like his mental state. It seems like, how can a sane or a possibly sane person think something like this, or even do something like this? I haven't seen any sort of updates. It could seem that this might have been a mentally disturbed person, but he could very well also be a person who has just gone into ideas and theories that he has just submerged himself and his mind into, and that he totally believes these things, or at least to a significant degree believes them, and then acts like this. Sometimes we dismiss when people do things like this, or believe things like this, that they must be like mentally disturbed somehow. From a psychological, clinical perspective, psychiatric perspective, the unpleasant truth is that many people who are actually sane can still believe very crazy things and do very crazy things. Also in 2011, well, 2011 was the study I referred to, but in 2011 we had in Norway, where I lived at that time, we had this terrorist that blew up the government building and then went onto an island and shot 60 plus young people from a political party. They were in a youth camp for a political party. And we had triggered a huge discussion among us as professionals. Was this man like insane? Has he to be held accountable for his acts and for what he did? Or was he actually sort of a sane person that can be held accountable? And it was very interesting. The two first expert psychiatrists who evaluated him came down and said, well, this man must have been schizophrenic. He must have been psychotic when he did these things. And while many of others, like including myself, said no, the acts that he did, the way he planned, the way he executed everything, is not the acts of a schizophrenic person. This man is sane. And eventually the second set of experts, they concluded that he had to be held accountable for it. And now he is in jail. The very unpleasant truth that sane people can do very crazy things and also do very evil things. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. Whenever people do something that is really out of the ordinary, don't just think that they it's probably explained away by some kind of mental illness. In general, people with mental illness are generally often very nice people, in my experience, and are not the ones who do often the really bad things. Conspiracy theories, and I find this text and this statement by Paul, the Apostle Paul, interesting here, writing to Timothy, and he's saying, and I feel this to me seems like the time we're living in. It's probably been the time we've always been living in, because this is human nature. But especially now, what we've been observing lately, to me, it seems like this is very relevant. He says, for the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine, or we could say sound truth, sound science, sound research, but instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. And that's very much, I think, what the internet has become. Sometimes we talk about the internet as an echo chamber, sort of whatever you believe in or want to believe in, or whatever sort of truths you are looking for, you will for sure find it. There's probably someone else out there in the world who believes the same kind of things. And when people get into discussions or read that kind of things, it's sort of they are affirming what they believe in already and just go further down the rabbit hole, in a way, as it's said in English American. Paul says they will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. And he's talking here, the context is more theology, teachings, doctrines, but I think this is very relevant and true also beyond that. Turn away their ears from truth and turn aside to myths. I think we've seen quite a bit of that. But he says, then admonishes, but you keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry. Keep your head in all situations. That can be challenging in the world that we're living in, when we are bombarded with all kinds of information. And it's really troubling. I'm currently living in the US, and it's really disturbing to see how the kind of news people are feeding themselves with has become so polarized. Also, people live now in different worlds simply because they're feeding themselves with very opposing kinds of information, and it's tearing the country apart. And I've been here only for 3 years, but I really worry for the future of this country, which have been sort of the safeguard of decency and soundness and democracy in the world. And who knows what is to come if we continue this way. Conspiracy theories, what are we actually talking about then? A definition here, and these are, it's the belief that a number of actors are joined together in secret agreement in order to achieve a hidden goal, which is perceived to be unlawful or malevolent. And we can break it down further. This is from a researcher from the Netherlands, who is an expert on these issues. He says there are 5 typical ingredients of this. and they're already mentioned, its patterns. Any conspiracy theory explains event by establishing non-random connections between actions, objects, and peoples. What he means by that is that what's happening, like we observe various things or think we observe various things, things that happen in the world, certain people in certain positions, or like things that happen, and then we start making connections between them, say these are not just random events, there is a deeper purpose and meaning within this. Number two, agency. Conspiracy theory assumes that a suspect event, the pandemic or whatever is happening, is caused on purpose by intelligent actors. So that's something that we're having now to deal with. There's been many ideas about why do we have, for example, this pandemic, who caused it. It's difficult for us as human beings. We want there to be meaning and purpose behind everything that we see, and just randomness, that this just would happen, that somehow somewhere in China that a virus would jump from maybe an animal to human beings and that causes it. That is something that is difficult for us to accept. We want, on some deeper level, we want there to be someone who is behind it. And I think also in as Christians, we have this challenge also sometimes where we attribute whatever happens in a way to God. Sort of, we said that it was God's will. Sometimes people say that, or people say everything happened for a reason. Though these are statements that are where we are denying or not willing to accept that some things are just random. And that's something I think we need to be conscious and reflective about. Sometimes we say horrible things about God, where we attribute things either to him, like ultimately he is allowing things, but like I often hear people like console themselves in a way by saying that God is in control. So like whatever happens is probably his will or his purpose in some way or another. To me, I think that a lot of things happen that are against God's will, against God's desire for us. I think there's like this happens all the time, but still because of the great conflict, the controversy, the drama that is going on in the world, God has to allow things to play out in order to achieve the greater purpose that he has. In that evil must become evident what it is. Yeah, I think many times if God had been actually selfish, he would have stopped everything, because I can't imagine what it must feel like to be God every day and knowing all the evil that is happening. Like all of us probably, if we had to deal with it, we would really struggle to go through our days if we actually were aware of everything that happens, all the evil, the pain that is in the world every day. But somehow God, he still endures. And I think whatever his reason is for keeping things going, allowing things to keep going, there must be a really good reason for that. Beyond that, coalitions, a conspiracy theory always proposes that there is a coalition between multiple actors, at least two. You cannot have a conspiracy if it's just one person, but there's multiple actors. The challenge with conspiracy theories is often when that they take on such grand scale, so they assume that there is sort of a secrecy, things are hidden. But the thing is, like, the more people who are involved, the more difficult it is to keep things secret. That's one way to spot a false conspiracy theory, is when it sort of proposes that almost everyone is in on it. Then for hostility, a conspiracy theory tends to assume that the suspected coalition pursue goals that are evil, selfish, and not in the public interest. So there's like what is being tried, like what they're trying to accomplish is something that is perceived as being negative. And then it's the continued secrecy. Conspiracy theories always propose that there is something hidden, and sort of it has not been proven yet. There is no hard evidence. People may strongly believe in these conspiracy theories, but still there's not sufficient evidence for everyone to like, if everyone would look at the evidence, many people would say, no, there is not sufficient evidence to actually believe in this. So in that sense, a conspiracy theory, by definition, is unproven. But that it is unproven doesn't stop people from believing wholeheartedly in it. And then sort of what we have to acknowledge is that conspiracies do happen. We have like multiple stories about that. One of the big challenges that one challenge that we're having with the vaccines, for example, in the US now, is that medical experiments have been done on vulnerable population groups in the US, for example, on Blacks. Terrible experiments that have been done that have actually been conspiracies by government systems, authorities, things that have been carried out, where that of course creates a distrust that we're also now facing, in terms of that people, because of history, are very skeptical and don't trust what is going on. So that's just one example. Like the Watergate scandal here with Nixon was for almost a year a conspiracy theory. People were sort of thinking or accusing the Republicans and the administration of having done things unlawfully, until eventually the hard evidence emerged to prove that actually there was a conspiracy, and the president resigned. So conspiracies happen. The problem is that many people spend a lot of time on conspiracy theories that are not rooted in any kind of reality. Then why do people adopt or believe conspiracy theories? Here are just some elements from like a psychological perspective, and like this is what you will, of course, I'm a psychiatrist, but I very much think that these conspiracy theory issues are very much rooted in psychology, more than anything else. One aspect that contributes to conspiracy theory is uncertainty, when we don't really know what's going on. For example, with this pandemic, we don't really know what happened. It may have, we don't really know yet if it just happened in nature, if it was an accident, or what actually happened. We don't quite know, and we may never fully know. But in this context where we don't fully know, then people are creating theories to try to explain things, try to make sense of this things, where we are escaping the randomness. And we also know that, like, the bigger a problem is, the bigger the consequences of something, often the more likely we are to attribute that there must really have been a purpose, a meaning behind it. So the worse the event is, the more likely that there will be conspiracy theories related to it. Often when there is fear, dangers, threats to oneself, the sense of that, or one's group, like for example, I mentioned like Blacks here in the US, and health issues, trusting the government, health authorities on that. This creates an environment also for generating conspiracy theories. General distrust in others, people who don't naturally have a trusting inclination to others, also more likely to adopt conspiracy theories. Then when there is feelings of powerlessness, anxiety, anxious attachment style, or general existential anxiety, also an environment where people are more likely to adopt conspiracy theories, groups that feel, or individuals that feel marginalized, ignored, cast out. And then lastly, also, when sometimes people use these conspiracy theories, or that they sort of are seeking this secret knowledge about things that others don't know. It can be also psychologically something that boosts self-esteem, that can feel I am important because I know things that others don't know. And it's also been like linked to narcissism. So why I'm saying this, like these are all aspects and issues, traits that has to do with vulnerability. And if we can, when people are struggling, or we acknowledge that some people are prone to going into these kind of theories, like attacking them, being harsh with them, that's probably just going to make things worse for them, because that just like aggravates all these traits in a way. If we can be compassionate, can try to be understanding, we don't need to agree, we shouldn't agree, but when we can like take a more like calm approach to people who are having issues, these kind of issues, then that will probably be more beneficial and helpful. So what I have sometimes said, that we should not so much listen to what they are saying in a way, and don't engage them on that level, but if we can listen to their heart, what's going on in their soul, in their mind, their pain, their suffering, and engage on that level, that's probably a more constructive and helpful way to engage with them. Some perspectives on fanaticism, and here you will see like how I think things very much overlap. I'm making the claim that not all fanatics are conspiracy theorists, but I think all conspiracy theorists are fanatics. So that's a claim I'm making. I could be wrong, but you are welcome to argue with me on that. Just want to throw in a couple of Ella White's statements now, and I will at the end also have some more. But here she's talking to the Adventist faith community, which I assume many of us are part of. And if you're not part of it, these are still very good perspectives to reflect on. But she says, as the end draws near, the enemy, the devil, will work with all his power to bring fanaticism among us. He would rejoice to see Seventh-day Adventists going to such extremes that they would be branded by the world as a body of fanatics. Against this danger, I am bidden to warn ministers and lay members. That's a strong statement about the danger of fanaticism, and that the devil is working hard for that. And there's some other very thought-provoking quotes that I will share at the end also. But just keep this in mind as we continue, that from the very beginning, as a church, we've struggled with fanaticism. And it seems like the devil, that's one of his strategies for making us irrelevant, not worthy of attention, and being listened to in this world. On the other side, from the same book, she also says, when the Lord works through human instrumentalities, like human people working through us, when men are moved with power from on high, Satan will lead his agents to cry fanaticism. So on the one side, Satan is trying to bring in fanaticism. On the other side, he's accusing people of being fanatics, also people who are not And yeah, he leads his agents to cry fanaticism and warn people not to go to extremes. Let all be careful how they raise this cry. She's not saying that we should not raise this cry. And she's not saying that we should never identify something as fanaticism. But she says that though there is a counterfeit coin, this does not lower the value of that which is genuine. So the devil's strategy on one side here, according to Ellen White, is to bring in fanaticism, and on the other side to label what is not fanaticism as fanaticism, because he knows how destructive it is when something is perceived as fanaticism. So this is sort of the tightrope we need to walk, not going into fanaticism, but also acknowledging that if we do the right things, we may also be accused of fanaticism. Some definitions on what are we talking about. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And it says, fanaticism is outlook and behavior, especially as exhibited by excessive enthusiasm, unreasoning zeal, and wild and extravagant notions on some subject. And extremism is, I think, very much linked, and I use these terms synonymously. Extremism is belief in and support for ideas that are very far from what most people consider correct or reasonable. Then another term that is often used synonymously, but probably shouldn't, is the term fundamentalism. And fundamentalism, it can be like defined in two ways. There are two ways of seeing it. It's one thing is a movement in the 20th century Protestantism, emphasizing the literal interpretation of the Bible, like interpreting literally and seeing it as fundamental to Christian life and teaching. Early Adventism, when it this was, I think, 1920s or something, that sort of fundamentalism rose within Protestantism. Adventism identified with it, was part of it there, but since we've distanced ourselves from it, so we still today, we do not consider, in general, ourselves as part of the fundamentalist Protestantism, evangelicalism in the church, though we have many similarities. A broader definition of fundamentalism is a movement or attitude stressing strict or literal adherence to a set of basic principles. What I would say that if you are either in fundamentalistic Christianity or in some kind of fundamentalistic group or context, probably quite more prone to both extremism and fanaticism. So just be careful how we're using these terms. In terms of understanding fanaticism, I found this article from 2002 very interesting, written by Perkinson, and it's called "Fanaticism: A Flight from Fallibility." And I'm not an English speaker; it's not my first language. I also looked up what does fallibility mean. Just be sure, and some of you also may want that definition. It's the tendency to make mistakes and be wrong, and that's something that is basic human nature. Sadly, that we all have this tendency to make mistakes and to be wrong. And Perkinson proposes that fanaticism very much is a way, an attempt to escape from this reality. He says there, and I find this definition, three key characteristics of a fanatic that are central. And I think if you apply these, also consider to a conspiracy theorist, you would also find that much of this very much applies also to them. A fanatic is dogmatic. He insists that his theories, his ideology, his solutions are the correct ones. Next, he is an obscurantist. That means he ignores or cannot perceive arguments, fact, or consequences that refute his solutions. So what he is he's very confident on one side of what he believes in, like absolute on that, he or she, but on the other side is ignoring, disregarding anything that goes against what they believe in. And that's what we very much see in conspiracy theorists also. And that's why I think this is very much linked. And finally, a fanatic is authoritarian. When he has the power, he tries to impose his answers on others. Fortunately, as we say, like oftentimes people who are fanatic conspiracy theorists, they come from a position of vulnerability, not of strength, but of weakness. And then they don't have the power, and then they can often be sort of quite harmless. But we've seen many times also fanatics, and also, even as we said, also conspiracy theorists, when they have the power, they can also do terrible things in trying to oppose what they believe on others. And this, I think, also is in terms of our spiritual context as religion. Really, it is very important to be cautious on these issues, because these traits often play out very much in religious context. Religion, spirituality can be a power. It can bring out the best in people, and fortunately it often does, but it most certainly can also bring out the worst. So when religion is used in this context, being dogmatic, obscurantist, authoritarian, then it becomes fanatical. We have plenty of stories about how people get hurt and harmed. And he says, Perkinson here, dogmatism, obscurantism, authoritarianism are all out of keeping with the human condition of fallibility. And when people become fanatics, they frequently make life hell for other people. That's a strong statement, but like I think many of us, when we think about groups or people who are fanatical, ultimately they often make hell for other people and also for themselves. I will skip a little here because for time. So that we get through. I want to finish with some of those statements by Ellen White. Quote here that I think is also relevant and meaningful is, ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. What we often see is that the people who know the least, who are the least educated, often are the most confident in what they believe. And now I may make some of you uncomfortable, because this is a quote by Charles Darwin. And I do this intentionally by dropping it in, because this to me is a bit of a fanaticism test. If this makes you very uncomfortable to acknowledge that maybe Charles Darwin said something that actually was true, then I would sort of carefully urge you to consider how you process information and how you deal with truth. Also, even though as sort of Adventists, we may take some issues with some of the things Charles Darwin said, we shouldn't dismiss that sort of he might have said and had some knowledge and understanding of something that actually was true, and that he contributed possibly some things. I'm not an evolutionist in any way, but I just find this important, that we are able to listen and to be in dialogue also with people that we disagree with. If we disagree with 90% of what they say, maybe we can agree with 10% of what they say. If we disagree with 10% of what they say, what they stand for, maybe we can still agree with the other 90% and be in a dialogue with them. And I think that is so important, that we're able to be in dialogue with one another. If we're not able to be in dialogue, then maybe we are actually fanatics. So now this was the only attempt to make you a bit uncomfortable. But like, to sum up, like, the harsh reality when we're dealing with these things is sometimes that the ignorant are too ignorant to know that they are ignorant. And I'm not saying this, this is not supposed to be in any arrogant kind of way, but this is also why I'm so appreciative of that we as a church has emphasized so much education, because education is not simply about acquiring knowledge. Education is about developing the mind, developing our ability to think and to reflect. And that is so valuable. And I think it's one of the best ways to avoid fanaticism and prevent fanaticism and extremism. One very interesting book that was written in 1951 is the book The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. And if you find sort of these topics interesting, I would recommend you to read it. He's not writing it from the position as a Christian, as a believer, but he is addressing the various kinds of fanatical movements that had, like, just 1951, just post Second World War, Nazism, fascism, communism, and all these isms that the world were dealing with at the moment, and these isms in many ways we are still dealing with. And you'll probably disagree with him, and the author Eric Hoffer here also says that you're fine, you're welcome to disagree with him on issues, but it's very interesting reflections that he has. And he says here about the fanatic, because that's really extremism and fanaticism is his topic. He says fanatic cannot be weaned away from his cause by an appeal to his reason or moral sense, but he finds no difficulty in swinging suddenly and wildly from one holy cause, and sort of, we don't mean really holy, but perceived holy, to another. He cannot be convinced, but only converted. That's the sad reality. Sometimes we see that people who tend to go extremes, they continue to go extremes, but if they abandon one extreme, they will often go to another extreme. He says then, and this is, I think, very insightful, though they may seem to be at opposite poles, fanatics of all kinds are actually crowded together at one end. It is the fanatic and the moderate who are poles apart and never meet. People who hold extreme views, fanatical views, even if they are extreme left, extreme right, for example, politically, often the underlying dynamics and psychology is often very much alike. And this is also, could say that within theology, extreme liberal people, extreme conservatives often have much more in common. The thing is that we also know that people who are on the liberal side tend to be less aggressive, less authoritarian. In the end, sort of, they don't care often if others won't go along with them. But unfortunately, on the extreme right, conservative sides, people can often be more authoritarian and more prone to imposing their views on others. He says also the fanatic, he is even ready to join in a holy crusade against his former holy cause, but it must be a genuine crusade. And these are traits typically uncompromising, intolerant, proclaiming the one and only truth. Mass movements can arise, he says, and spread without belief in a God, but never without belief in a devil. Usually the strength of a mass movement is proportionate to the vividness and tangibility of its devil. What you typically see in these movements, the enemy is very clearly defined, and often there's a lot of focus on the enemy and the evil or perceived evil that one is trying to fight against. And to me, it's a sign, a symptom of someone or something that has gone to an unhealthy extreme whenever this focus on like the enemy is very strong. And that's also within our faith community, when you see people who are like mostly interested, spend most of their time trying to figure out what's going on in the Vatican, or all kinds of conspiracies, Sunday laws. I'm not saying that I don't believe in that Sunday laws will come, but some people are just obsessed about these things rather than preaching the gospel, preaching Christ, grace, love, mercy, justice, these issues that really should be our main focus. So that's something like should be a red flag whenever we see that. Another reflection that I also seen, when people are not at peace with themselves, often they will be at war with the world or the people around them. Also an indication, but a reason for compassion and understanding. I will run through quickly now at the end, and then we can have some time for discussion. Some of these quotes by Ellen White, and I would recommend, if you find this interesting, also to look up, go to E.G. White writings, search there for the words fanaticism, extremism, or fanatic, these words, and see what she writes. This, what I'm sharing with you, is not everything, but it's really, I think she really had a deep insight and understanding of these issues, and what she wrote before all the other experts that I have quoted. But I think you will see that there are many parallels in that. She says, writing in 1889, she says that we have found in our experience that if Satan cannot keep souls bound in the ice of indifference, he will try to push them into the fire of fanaticism. So the Satan works in many different ways. He has many strategies on how to destroy people. One thing is like to keep things where, so typically we say this, like when people are backslidden or sort of they drift away from the church, the ice of indifference, that may be one thing, but as bad and as problematic is when he succeeds in pushing people into the fire of fanaticism. It may seem that it's more holy, it may seem that it's more righteous in a way, and often we fail to raise the red flags and appropriate critique of it. But it is as dangerous and as much the strategy of the devil. She says, it is the desire and plan of Satan to bring in among us those who will go to great extremes. And what are the characteristics? People of narrow mind, who are critical and sharp and very tenacious in holding their own conception of what truth means. They will be exacting and will seek to enforce rigorous duties and go to great lengths in matters of minor importance, while they neglect the weightier matters of the law, judgment, and mercy, and the love of God. Through the work of a few of this class of persons, the whole body of Sabbath keepers or Adventists will be designated as bigoted, pharisaical, and fanatical. The work of the truth, because of these workers, will be thought to be unworthy of notice. So it causes a lot of harm. She says, and this is in terms of health, and I like that. She was a big health reformer, but still she said this: I have something to say in reference to extreme views in health reform or health message, as we would say today. Health reform becomes health deform, a health destroyer, when it is carried to extremes. And unfortunately, we also have seen too much of this in our church. When those who advocate hygienic reforms, that also the health message, carry the matters to extremes, people are not to blame if they become disgusted. Too often our religious faith is thus brought into disrepute, and in many cases those who witness such exhibitions of inconsistency can never afterward be brought to think that there is anything good in the reform. These extremists do more harm in a few months than can be undone in a lifetime. And strong statement, they are engaged in a work which Satan loves to see go on. She says, two classes of people have been presented before me. First, those who are not living up to the light which God has given them. That's a problem. Secondly, those who are too rigid in carrying out their one-sided ideas of reform and enforcing them on others, equally much a problem. When they take a position, they stand to it stubbornly and carry nearly everything over the mark. Those who labor for Christ should be men, and I think this is the appeal. Those who labor for Christ should be men and women of great discretion, so that those who do not understand their doctrines may be led to respect them and regard them as persons void of fanaticism, void of rashness and impetuosity. Their discourses and conduct and conversation should be of a nature that will lead men to the conclusion that these ministers are men and women of thought, of solidity of character, men who fear and love their heavenly Father. They should win the confidence of the people so that those who listen to the preaching may know that these ministers have not come up with some cunningly devised fable, whether it's theological or conspiracy theories or fanatical ideas, but that their words are words of truth, a testimony that demands thought and attention. And ultimately, she says, let people see you exalting Jesus and hiding self. Again, like a red flag warning sign when you see people cultivating a cult around themselves, their own person, then that's not a good sign. Let people see you exalting Jesus and hiding self. Those who are close students of the words, following Christ in humility of soul, will not go into extremes. And I think humility here is a key word. The Savior never went to extremes, never lost self-control, never violated the laws of good taste. And this is the final quote, and it's one of my favorite quotes. She says here, there are professing Christians who think it's their duty to make every other Christian like themselves. And she says, this is man's plan, not the plan of God. In the Church of God, there is room for characters as varied as the flowers in the garden. In his spiritual garden, there are many varieties of flowers. And I think this is the challenge that we have as human beings. We are usually most comfortable with people who are like ourselves and who think like we do, who act like we do, who believe what we do. But like in God's world, there is room for a lot of variety. And it's not our duty, it's not God's will that we should make everyone do like create everyone in our own image. We should be created in God's image, and that is much bigger than whatever image any one of us have. So I will end there. Now, if we have any thoughts, any questions, reflections, critique, I'd be happy to that we can share that. Did it trigger anything?
Thank you very much, Torban. Very interesting presentation. And while listening to you, it is true that I was thinking that it is true that in a way it is, finding the right balance. This is in a way the challenge that we are all facing. Finding the right balance between focusing on what is essential, and not losing our energy in things that are in a way not benefiting us, in our walk with Christ, and in being a model for others. It's a really very, I think, timely reminder, because sometimes we want to know, and we are tempted to read a lot and invest a lot of time and energy in things that in a way don't benefit. And it makes me think of the Bible verse who says, there are many good things, but not all are good for our spiritual growth. And thanks a lot for bringing this back, this message and this refocus to our minds. I think we have a couple of minutes, so if there are any questions and comments, or anything that you want to raise and share. I saw Violetta opening her video. I don't know if it is.
Hi everybody. No, I didn't really have any question. I find it also very interesting, your presentation, Torban. Hello. Nice to see you again in Belgium. No, I don't really have. I find it very condensed and very clear for me, so I don't really have a question. Sorry.
What I find sad is that people are wasting their life and energy sometimes in going into these things. I think it's a big danger. Now we have, with our computers, internet, you can spend so much time going around in these worlds of either conspiracy theories or arguing in whatever social media or chat or discussion forum. It's sad to see, and often when people fight about these things, it's so unchristian. Just sometimes looking at when look at our church, I've seen sort of when sometimes things are posted, the kind of way people comment in those comment sections. It's quite sad. And sort of people are probably on one thing, they think that they are fighting for a right cause in a way, but doing it in such an unchristian way. So this is a huge challenge. I think we have it brings to the surface deeper problems. That sort of fighting on these issues gives us a justification for acting out the worst in us. And that's, we have a lot of work to do, I think.
May I react? There's one thing that stood out to me from what you said. It's a reaction to everything, not just what you've just said, but it was that a lot of the people who are pushing forward these conspiracy theorists are very vulnerable, and they're seeking for some kind of stability. So to me, it's very much fear. And so when we're trying to figure out whether or not, how far are we going, to find the balance, we have to ask ourselves, is there fear involved? And there's just a few verses that come to mind. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound mind. There is no fear in love, because perfect love casts out fear. And the last is, greater is he who is in me or in you than he who is in the world. So we get to walk around. I think that's like, this was such a timely reminder, because it seems like in this world, we're all looking for an enemy when the enemy has been defeated, and we get to like live with the power of the Holy Spirit. So that lets us focus on what the fruit of the Spirit is, which is not fear, but love and peace and joy. And I think that's a good barometer for us. And yeah, again, thank you for the presentation.
And I think thank you. And I think you bring up like a keyword, fear is very much at the root of this. And of course, it's scary to live in this world. There is sort of reason to fear. There's lots of things, lots of threats and dangers. But then when we see them in the places where we shouldn't see them, and also we don't seek safety and security where we should seek it, then we're in trouble. And that's unfortunately, religion can really like aggravate that fear. Like another talk I do about like healthy spirituality, it's another topic I've been interested in. There was a study done by an anthropologist on Indian tribes and their religion, and she divided them in fear-driven religions and love-driven religions. And so she compared how did that manifest, how did that like in their culture. And when you saw in these fear-driven religions, people are self-centered, they are in conflict with one another, they believe that the gods they believed in, they have to be sort of like, you have to sacrifice to them, you have to appease the gods, you have to like do everything to be on good terms with the gods, while and also like just was just interesting. We as Adventists, we have sort of a bit of difficult relationship to dancing, but what they found that dancing in these fear-driven religions were very self-centered, like performance. They were showing off. That's what they were doing. While the love-driven religions, then they were community-focused. There were like a lot of joy, good relationships between people. They were like trusting relationships with the gods. Sort of they didn't fear the gods, and like dancing was communal. It was something that they did together. So again, just shows like how it comes down to these things like love or selfishness, like the great controversy theme that everything is about, and sort of fear, selfishness, how closely linked they are, and how destructive they are to community. And I think that's what we're seeing around the world. Like I'm not an anthropologist, and I'm not a sociologist, and I don't understand much about politics. But what I see, like in the world we're living in, that there is a lot of fear now, and that is driving a lot of these conflicts and extremes that we are seeing. And I think we should be really, as a church, so much focused on counteracting that fear, and providing in our teaching, in our preaching, because sadly there's been a lot of fear also in things that have been preached, and the kind of messages that we are giving. But like rather, I think our aim should be make our Adventism more and more like a love based religion that is really the solution to everything.
Thank you very much. This, I think, fits very well with the overall theme of, and the topics that we've had in the Congress so far. Is exactly, and it's always wonderful how God brings things together, because we had presentations in the main plenary about the character of God, and understanding, understanding that sometimes the source of our wrong perception of God is Satan, and recognizing that Jesus came to break the prejudice that had built up in Israel, and that we are also prone to experience, attributing things to God which are not from Him, and not His nature, and do not correspond to who God really is. So I think this is another example. This topic is another example of the importance of really knowing the character of God and being anchored in a correct image of Him.
Yeah. Can I just? Sure. It comes to mind also in this other talk that I do. I have this another Ellen White quote, and I can't say it exactly, but she says exactly that Satan has worked to misrepresent the image of God and make us believe in like a false image, like character of God. But when we truly believe, like the John 3:16, that God so loved the world that He came and said, that will change in us, like that will change us into the image of God as well. When we fully can believe that and accept that is what changes us. It's not all kinds of rules or like these external things, but it's really knowing the character of God and who He is, and ourselves as loved by Him. That's our only way to salvation and to sanctification. And I think like in my own life, I've sort of experienced this in glimpses when I really like get sort of like how good God is, and like how much He loves me and likes me and cares for me. But that sort of changes like how like you go about living life in this world. So just thank you.
Thank you, indeed. And this is a challenge for us to love each other and also approach people whom we don't agree with in this world of increasing polarization, to focus more and more on love and on trying to get united and converge in the love of God. I think our time is more or less running out. Unless anyone has a pressing question or comment, maybe I would like to ask you, Torban, to close with a prayer for us.
I'll do that. Yes.
Thank you.
Dear Lord, we've discussed things that are very relevant both in the world we live and in the church that we live. Lord, we have not talked about this because we want to put labels on people, because we want to criticize people or groups, segments within the church. But Lord, I pray that you will give us wisdom so we can manage these things well, also that we can reflect on ourselves, our own thinking, our own hearts, to what extent we are prone also to falling into these traps of the devil. But Lord, also help us, pray especially, to be people who can build bridges, who can bring healing, who can bring comfort, who can counteract fear, so that we can become this church that is a healthy place, a healing place, where people are loved and cared for, despite the shortcomings that we all have. And Lord, that we can be more and more as individuals. And Lord, we pray also as a church that we can be shaped in your image, so that we can really go into this world, be an agent for what is good, what is just, for love, for mercy, for grace. Lord, the world needs that so much. People need that so much. And Lord, I think if we truly would be able to embody your image, to live in your image, represent your image, that then we would be incredibly attractive to many of those people in the world, including ourselves, who are searching for meaning, for purpose, for hope, and for something better. Oh Lord, pray that you will give us kind hearts, warm hearts, loving hearts, hearts that are shaped according to your heart, and that we may be your children truly within the church and within the world and the communities that we live in. Lord, pray a blessing for everyone who has been in the group. We have not been that many, but Lord, I pray also that you may help us to use these thoughts, these ideas, these perspectives as we interact with others, and that we can spread what is good to others. Pray in your name. Amen.